All right. So Samantha, thank you so much for joining me. I wanted to jump on today and just talk to you more about what 16 Strong Project is and help people understand what ACE scores are, adverse childhood experiences. I personally got interested in learning more about ACE score research. A couple of years ago, I saw Nadine Burke Harris's TED Talk about what happens later on in life if you have a lot of trauma in your childhood, and that just shocked me. I had lab work done a couple of years ago, and it showed that I had higher levels of inflammation. The doctor used words like potential autoimmune disease, metabolic syndrome. I have high blood pressure, I've got glucose issues and all that kind of stuff, which was really surprising to me because I exercise, I eat healthy, I'm very spiritually minded and healthy. And, I work really, really hard at being healthy because of my past. So that was something that led me to research more about how our trauma in childhood affects us into adulthood. And that's something that I talk with my clients about in intentional holistic healing, is how that trauma affects us. We have physical manifestations later on. A lot of our behaviors come from that. We end up in abusive relationships, toxic work environments, a lot of that stuff because of the trauma in childhood. Our self-talk, really stems from all of that. So I just wanted to come on today and talk to you. We met a couple of months ago, and I love what you're doing. I think that is so necessary, and I think that any way that we can get the word out about what you're doing is so important. So with that, just give us an idea of, your background and how you kind of got into this.
Yeah, of course. So thank you for inviting me. I'm so excited to talk again. I'm so happy that we were connected to begin with, because so much of what you're talking about and what you've experienced and what you're doing is connected to what I do and what 16 Strong does, or my program that I'll tell you all more about. So Stephanie, again, thank you for having me on. So to introduce myself, I'm Samantha. I am the founder of a program called the 16 Strong Project. And the overall general mission of 16 Strong is to empower resilience to adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. So we work with young people, adolescents, middle school, high school, and some into college as well, on ways that they can overcome and become resilient despite of some of their adversity or adverse experiences. So what we really try and do is help young people recognize the situations that they might be in, because a big piece of this is that sometimes when you're going through something and it's your life and it's your everyday, and if it's your family or it's something you're experiencing at home, you don't always realize that what you're going through or what you're experiencing is potentially impacting you in a negative way, or is abnormal or atypical, because it's your life. And so a big piece of what we do focuses around education. So teaching young people what ACEs are, what that means to have an ACE or multiple ACEs, and more importantly, things that they can do starting at a young age after they have this recognition to sort of navigate those challenges and potential negative impacts that might come along with these experiences. So things like developing positive coping skills, the importance of strong support systems. We use pop culture and media a lot in what we do to help meet young people kind of where they're at. It's kind of like you're already listening to or watching these things, like you can use these as resources too, because the people and the characters in songs and movies are often going through things or talking about things, whether it's mental health related or ACEs related. So in a nutshell, like that's our overall mission, is to empower resilience to ACEs through various means that I'll get into in a little bit, or I'll tell you all more about the different ways that we do that. So I don't know. Is there anything more specific on the mission that you want me to go into first? I can also talk about why I started it, but go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I'd love to hear, a little bit of your background about why you got into it, and also maybe just a brief outline of ACE scores. I know that mine is easily a 7, arguably 8 or 9, which makes me, at risk for so many different things. I know the higher your score, the more you're at risk for physical issues and especially, mental health issues as well. So maybe outline that a little bit? Because I think when
Sure.
people hear trauma or childhood trauma, a lot of them automatically assume, physical abuse, but there are so many other things that are on that checklist that people don't necessarily think about. And I don't think parents realize how that affects their children later on in life. It affects the relationships that they choose and all of that. So I think that's really important for people to understand.
Yeah, definitely. So the ACE score is something that it came out of a research study that was done in 1997, where they highlighted or they identified 10 primary factors that are now considered adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, that impact people during their childhood and resulting in longer term impacts later in life as well. So those include things like emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, living with one or fewer biological parents, also including divorce, having mental illness in the home, incarcerated parent, things along those lines have been identified in that initial study as ACEs. And so the ACE quiz is really basically a checklist, like you were mentioning, Stephanie, of, am I someone who has gone through any of these 10 things? And the statistics tell us that 2/3 or 67% of people have experienced at least one ACE in their lifetime by the age of 18. So it's a really, really staggering number when you think about it that way. And I like to tell that to all of the young people that I work with as well, because it's so important for us to realize that we're not alone in what we've gone through or what we are going through. 67%, that is quite a bit more it's quite a bit more than half. So it's the majority of people have experienced at least one of these things. And as you go down the line, I believe it's 12.5% have experienced 4 or more. So that's still a significant percentage. And then 2 and 3 fall in the middle somewhere. And 4 or more puts you at particularly higher risk, like you were also mentioning, for physical health, potential physical health implications in the long term. So that was the original ACEs study and what the ACEs quiz or ACEs score is based off of. However, since then, there's been a number of different things that have been identified as adverse experiences for young people that are not necessarily on that first study. So things like bullying or living in a violent neighborhood, experiencing racism, different environmental factors, and otherwise that might not have been on that initial list. So when we think about ACEs at 16 Strong and the way that I think about it, I try and use that more comprehensive, expanded list, because these are things that impact people in a potentially negative way as well, even though they're not officially part of the first ACEs study that was done at this point 20 plus years ago. So
yeah,
I
think that's really important to highlight too, is that this study was done way before social media. It was done before so many things have been brought to light, just this year alone. And I think that I would love to see, numbers now updated, because so many things are different from when I was a child, and to see what kids are going through these days is just, it's really heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking because if you know about ACE scores, you have a pretty good idea of how these things could potentially play out for them if they don't have access to the education, if they don't have access to tools to utilize to veer off that path. And that's why I think it's so important what you're doing, getting the education out there and helping kids, giving them opportunities to change that.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's so important to try and think about it that way, especially like you mentioned, kids now have, social media and things that did not exist when you or I were going through high school, middle school. That just creates so many additional issues that cause negative impacts for young people now. So that's why I think it's important to think about this expanded list and how many things really do can potentially cause harm to young people. And even as we're thinking about just this year, when we're thinking about all of the negative impacts that have come as a result of the pandemic, I would argue that all of the kids have now experienced some form of adversity in some way, shape, or form. Because they're missing out on certain life events. They are potentially losing family members. There are financial hardships that are happening in their home if their parents are potentially out of work because of the pandemic, and just so many other things that are going on this year alone that are impacting our youth in a way that we probably won't even be able to imagine for years to come, which is a really scary thought. But I think it's important to realize that now, so that we can try and get ahead of some of these impacts that might not be seen for years.
Yeah. And I think that if there could be, a positive in this year, it is that there is finally a spotlight being shown on trauma and how it can affect people, and everybody is feeling it this year. I think no matter where you are, what you're dealing with, I think everybody is dealing with some form of mental health issues related to what's going on this year. It's scary. We have no idea, what's going to come next. And for kids, I've talked to so many of my friends lately, and just learning what their kids are going through right now, learning what they're dealing with as a parent. And it is astronomical, the things that everyone are going through right now.
Totally. And it makes it that much more important, like you said, to talk about it and to call it what it is. It is traumatic and it's hard, and we all need to somehow be resilient, or try and be resilient, which is so hard for kids who don't understand or who don't know what these terms are or know what the impact might be. I know we're both talking as two people who have lived through things and also work in this field and study this stuff. So it's so important to get that information to especially young people, also in a way that's understandable for them and easy to be digested.
Yeah, creating the conversation also, because so much of what you go through as a child, you think you're the only one. You think you're alone. You look at your friends that don't necessarily have the same life as you, maybe, and you think that nobody understands what it's like. And that can just also lead to such devastating acts that further impact everybody else. And, I think it is really important to talk to young people about the fact that, not denying their pain, but also you're not alone in this. There are so many other people that go through these similar feelings. I mean, they are feelings, they're emotions that we're having, whether it's feeling alone, feeling singled out, feeling like nobody loves us, nobody likes us, so many of those things, they continue into adulthood. And as an adult, we realize that we can get through this. We've been through a lot of hard things, but when you're 14, 15 years old and you haven't been outside of your home, you haven't been exposed to, positive experiences, positive relationships, and all of that, you just don't realize how much more is to come, as far as like health and happiness. So I think it is really important to press that with kids and have these conversations.
Totally. And to get into why this is a good segue into why I started the 16 Strong Project, because it's really along those lines of helping kids understand that they're not alone and they're also not to blame for anything that might be going on in their lives. So I started this program based on my own experiences. So I grew up, my father struggled with mental illness and addiction issues. And so he actually hasn't been part of my life since I was in middle school. So that's many, many years now, because his struggles, his challenges led him into certain behaviors and actions that pretty much destroyed our family and our home life. And this was something that I dealt with, on a daily basis and like ongoing period. And then eventually it all just unraveled, and he hasn't been part of our lives since then. So the even bigger issue was, though, that I had no idea that anybody would understand anything that I was talking about. I was all throughout high school, middle school as well, but then throughout high school, even after he wasn't part of our life, I was like, no one will understand what I'm talking about. And so I didn't talk about it. I just kind of kept going, and I kept it to myself. I had my mom, who's incredibly supportive and still is, and my brother as well. And so I had them. And then other than that, no one knew what I was going through. And I was someone who I did really well. I did really well in high school. I played on 3 different varsity sports teams. I excelled athletically, academically. I had friends. And so no one thought to even check on me, because they thought from the outside, oh, well, she's totally put together. She comes to school every day. She does well in her classes. She's on teams. She has friends. Like, why would someone check on me? And I don't blame them for not checking on me, but that's also why I was programmed to kind of reiterate the importance of checking in on everyone, regardless of what they appear to look like from the outside, because that was something that I think I probably would have benefited from if someone was just like, hey, like, how's it going? Like, how's everything at home or whatever? Anything like that, even something so simple. So that was kind of my situation growing up. I also very often blamed myself because I didn't understand like what mental health issues were, like what a mental illness was. Like I knew what addiction was, but I didn't really know how it could start. Like, so as a kid, I was like, okay, well, I'm a kid and this is my parent, so I probably did something. Like I most definitely must have done something. So I was always searching for like, what did I do that caused this? Which is really, really hard to have to.
That's a lot on your shoulders
to
carry throughout life.
Right. And it wasn't something that we ever learned about in school. So nothing, like I didn't talk about it. We didn't learn about it in school. So I just kept thinking that I was the only one and that I was to blame for something. And so it wasn't until several years later that I think I finally kind of like phased out of that with support from my family. But it was something that I never wanted. I would not want another young person, adolescent, teenager to have to go through what I had to go through, what I had to keep inside. So that's really where 16 Strong came from, was the desire to help young people who were like myself, and so many, now I know this, so many millions of other kids, to help kids like myself and millions of other kids not have to feel that blame or like they're alone in the way that I did.
It's a lot. It's a lot to take. Thank you for sharing that. Because it is a lot to go through. And even though, you know, we're on the other side of it, I think there's always healing to be done. I think that sharing our stories is very therapeutic. I think it's healing. I think that it really helps other people to come forward because, like you said, so many people blame themselves, and they think that they're alone. And that is just, it's a definite recipe for disaster. You know, and I think when I was growing up, I definitely had a very different home life from a lot of my friends. There were, you know, drugs and alcohol in my home. My father, he was abusive to my mother and brother. He was not physically abusive to me. But I saw a lot of abuse. As the eldest child, I definitely took that in, and I took responsibility of my siblings. And, you know, it was constantly, you just never knew what you were going to get. Like I could come home after school and there's a bunch of people, old men, you know, around my table getting high, you know, and it just, I had no idea what I was ever going to walk into, which are always, you know, walking on eggshells. And my mother, she did, you know, work a lot and everything. So she provided for us like that, but she was very emotionally neglectful. She was very cold. You know, I don't remember her hugging or loving me, any of those things as a child. And I think the one person in my corner was my aunt. So I was able to see her, you know, and that helped, but it definitely, oh my goodness, you know, I was 12 when my sister was born. And I think that gave me something to hold on to, because even at 12 years old, I was cutting myself, you know, throughout middle school and high school. I was cutting myself. I was definitely, you know, using drugs and stuff to numb, and just doing so many things that, you know, obviously didn't serve me, but helped numb and get me through. And suicide was definitely something that, you know, I thought about all the time. And in our hometown community, there's just a devastating list of suicides in our hometown community. And that's why I think that this type of stuff is so important for people to see, that you can come out of these homes, you can come out of this type of trauma, and there are people that will help you. There are tools that you can access. And there are spaces where you can talk about it safely,
Yep.
to realize that you're not alone. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that too.
Um,
I think that that ties in nicely. A lot of what we focus on is the importance of finding those healthy coping skills that work well for you. And something that I often reiterate, and I know the kids that I work with probably get tired of hearing it, but I think it's so important that it can be hard sometimes to find healthy coping skills that work well for you, because there are so many options that it's not always the first thing you try, or what works for someone else might not work for you. And I think that can be kind of hard to work through and find those things that work well for you. Especially, I know that we often hear about like meditation and journaling and things like that. And personally, those things don't work for me. And I've tried, and it makes things worse for me because I get caught in my own thoughts and all of this stuff. And I know that it works well for a lot of other people. And I do have things that work for me. But even when I see so much about like meditation and journaling, I'm like, there are other things too. We have to make sure that we're telling people to like try other things if those things don't work, because especially as a kid, if someone suggests things, it can be so easy to be like, oh, well, that didn't work for me, so I'm just going to go on to something that, you know, might work quicker, unfortunately. And sometimes the things that provide the more immediate relief to us are the things that harm us in the long run. So those are
true.
Yeah. So these are points that, like I said, I repeat so often that kids I work with probably get sick of hearing it, but it's so important to like push through and find the things that work for you. And if it's not the first thing you try, like keep trying, exercising, drawing, writing, listening to music, anything really, like talking to a therapist, talking to a friend, like whoever those people and those things are, find the ones that work for you. And it is okay if it is not the first things you try.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, I've always been very curious, and just learning stuff and educating myself around it has helped me. You know, I have a friend who's dealing with some autoimmune issues, and I talked to her about the ACE scores and stuff. And I was like, oh, there's these books you should read. And she was like, well, what is it going to do? You know, like for me, it really does relieve some of the shame and the anger at my parents, you know. And I always think like I've dealt with so much of it, but it comes in cycles. And I recently just hit a cycle again where I had some things happen, and it really dredged up a lot of frustration and anger with my parents over the way things were in my home growing up. Because as a grown woman, I'm 38 now, and I could potentially be dealing with health effects that shorten my life, that take my time away from my husband. You know, even though I have done all the things to try to be healthier and create a good life for myself, it's really frustrating to feel like that is still kind of hanging over my head in some ways. So I've done everything I can, you know, as far as education and just learning the different things that I can do. For me, meditation is not something I like either, honestly. I know people are like, well, if you don't like it, you should probably do it more.
I've heard that too. I've been told that too. I'm like, I promise I've tried.
It's just not my thing, but I have realized, you know, I know that coloring activates the same areas in your brain as meditation. So I love to color. To me, that is very therapeutic, and I know it's something that will help calm me down. I like to lift weights. I go crazy with the weights at the gym.
I'm with you.
Like that to me is just so soothing. You know, I mean, I might like rage in my mind while I'm doing it. I'll think about like the stuff that upsets me and makes me angry, but that is something that it helps me focus. It gives me energy. It makes me feel more powerful in my body. And for a lot of trauma survivors, you know, most of us dissociate to get through the trauma. We do that throughout our childhood. I have a very long history of sexual abuse and sexual trauma. So for me, dissociating is something that I've had to really like counteract in the past few years. Like, what is going to help me feel safe in my body? What's going to help me get back in my body? And exercise, you know, lifting weights is definitely one of them. When I was a kid, music, like uplifting music, that really helped me. There's so many songs that, you know, definitely got me through.
Yep.
And then, just having some good friends. And I didn't always talk about the stuff that I was going through because I felt awkward. I felt odd. I
Yep.
felt like nobody else understood. Now looking back, I understand that my father had a traumatic brain injury, which accounted for a lot of the aggression, the addiction, the mental health issues. So that's helped me come to terms with everything, but it doesn't erase, everything that
Right.
happened.
It still happened.
So for me, again, like education, exercise is huge. And just really kind of entertaining everything. I'm very, spiritual and woo-woo. That's really helped me. Those types of things I have felt, Reiki has been amazing. And it's something that you don't even have to be touched by another human being, but it has been one of the most powerful things to help me release a lot of pain and trauma. So I think, just loading these kids up, whether they're like, oh my gosh, I've heard it, giving them every different tool, because it is different. It is different for everybody. Some people love meditation. I tried hot yoga a couple times. It's not for me. I wanted so badly to love yoga. I wanted really badly to love hot yoga. And it's so funny because I found myself in there, and I mean, I really, really struggled emotionally when I was in there, and I'm crying in the back of the room, and I'm like, you've got 45 minutes left. Like, you're halfway through, just stick it out, and I'm like, you've stayed in abusive relationships for years. Why can't you just do this for 45 minutes? But, I think there's also that line of like knowing what's for you and knowing what's not for you.
Right. I'm definitely with you on that. Yoga's not for me. I've tried so many times. I'm the same. Weightlifting, music, all that sorts of stuff is for me. I've tried yoga so many times. I don't get anything out of it, and I really want to. And I realized that I do actually like hot yoga, but I recently had this realization that it's not the yoga part I like. I just like the hot part, which I can just get from like a sauna. So I've decided that
that's what I do.
Yoga, exactly. So I've decided yoga's not for me. And the only reason I liked hot yoga was because of the hot part of it. So I've realized that about myself, but it's just so important to figure out these things that work well for us. And what I think it is for me, and it was growing up as well, especially in high school, is these were things that were within my own control. So like when I felt like things I couldn't control at home, I excelled academically and athletically because I knew if I just worked hard, did all my assignments, practiced hard, all those things those were all things that I could do. Like I personally was in control of how well I did in those particular things. So that's what I did. And so from the outside, I do understand how to most people it looked like I was doing great because I was. But the reason behind it was a lot because these were things that I personally could do. I could practice hard. I could exercise and be in shape for sports. I could study harder. I could do all my assignments on time. I could participate in class. Like I was the only person that I had to worry about with those things. And so I think that's what it came back to for me for a lot of the time was that control piece. These were things that I could control and I could handle. And so I did. And that's what I did when I couldn't control like what was going on at home or how we had ended up in the situation that we were in.
It's so important to highlight that. And I love that you talk about that because oftentimes we do see, especially females, they're overachievers, perfectionists, they're doing all the stuff. A lot of times it is a coping mechanism because you have that control. So I think especially this year more than any, it is always important to check in on the people, even especially the strong ones, because they're typically the ones that aren't going to reach out either, because they don't want to be viewed in any way other than strong. So tell me a little bit more about the programs for teachers, because I know we've talked about that a little bit, and I would love to give this information to all of my friends up in New York. By the way, we are from the same area, right? Did you grow up in Binghamton?
No, I went to college in Binghamton.
Okay.
So I'm from a little bit further downstate, but close enough.
Okay. And
or I
I'm
was
from Walton, which is, nobody ever knows where that is. It's near Delhi, Noniana. But Binghamton was, the big city near us. It was an hour
That's so
away
funny to me
when I was
because I
growing up.
do live closer to New York City, but yeah, I spent 4 years in Binghamton. So, and that's, I think part of well, Stephanie found us on Instagram, I'm pretty sure, but we had recently posted a bio about me and it said that I went to Binghamton. And I think
I
that's
was like,
what you were like, oh my
oh,
gosh, you do this cool work and you
yeah.
went to Binghamton. So that was another connecting factor here. So, but yeah, let me tell you about the different types of programs that we have. So I say the main piece, but like the primary piece of 16 Strong is a workshop that lasts for, it's like 8 or 9 weeks, depending on how big the group is and how long the different activities take. But really what this workshop is designed to do is introduce students, middle school and high school students, to ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And the way that we do that is really through the lens of mental health, because that is what they are typically seeing at that point, is the mental health impacts potentially caused by ACEs. So what we really are trying to do is identify with these kids, like what is potentially the root cause of some of the mental health issues that you are experiencing or people are experiencing. And how can we take really a proactive approach to try and prevent some of these mental illnesses, addiction issues from developing by addressing these root causes, which are not always, but are often linked to ACEs. And so the workshop is really designed in a way that we introduce students to the term ACEs. We talk about the importance of using the right language when you are talking about mental health in general. So things like not using the word depressed incorrectly if you really mean that you're feeling sad, nervous and anxious and things like that. So making sure that you're using the right language, because it can be harmful to people who have been diagnosed with depression or have been diagnosed with anxiety or things like that, if you're using the terms incorrectly. So we talk a lot about the language you're using, what ACEs are, the statistics around ACEs, and trying to bring that to a more like school or classroom level to make it more, almost like more relevant or like more directly impactful. Because when you hear however many millions of people have experienced a certain mental illness or ACEs, it's such a big number and you're like, wow, that's a lot. But until you kind of bring it back to like, okay, so 1 in 5 people have a parent or family member living with a mental illness, or live with a parent or family member who struggles with mental illness or addiction. If you bring it back to like a classroom, if you're thinking about if you're sitting in like a row of desks, and if it's not you who's experiencing it, it's either the person in front of, behind you, or on either side of you, because that's 5 people. So it's one of those 5 people doing things like that. So it really brings it home, because 20% or 1 in 5, you're like, yeah, okay, that's a lot. But when you think about it and put yourself in this position of like sitting in this classroom, statistically speaking, it's one of the 5 people in that small group that I just listed. So trying to bring those statistics home to help them really realize, like, this is something that if you are experiencing it, you're not alone. And if you're not experiencing it, it's very likely that someone is. Yeah. We go through the importance, like I mentioned, of healthy coping skills and do a lot of brainstorming activities about what those are, what they can look like, why they're so important. And this year in particular, we've been trying to focus mostly on ones that we can definitely do still during this time, because that's another thing, is that so many things that everyone really has used as coping skills might not be available to us, whether gyms are closed or sports are canceled or we can't see our friends or things like that. So trying to think about things that we can do during this time. Hopefully by next year, I'll be saying we can do any of the coping mechanisms, but at this point, yeah, we tried to specifically focus on those, but really any positive coping skills, the importance of distinguishing between healthy and unhealthy coping skills that I mentioned a little bit about before. We talk a lot about the importance of support systems and who those people are in your life that can be supportive. So the workshop has students sort of brainstorm and create a web that identifies who those people are in your life. It's always funny because I think kids, as they're going through it, it feels like a bit of like, okay, whatever, I'm just going through the steps. But afterwards, the feedback that's always been given is this was actually really helpful to think about, because either I didn't realize I had so many people that I could go to, or now I know who I can go to. I've thought about it ahead of time, so that if I'm in a situation where I need help or support or advice, I've already thought about it, who I can go to, because we do often see, I'm sure you've realized this, or you've seen this yourself, I'm sure that sometimes when we're in a situation where we're like, we need help, like I need help now, like who do I go to, what do I do, it can be so hard to think. So to have people think about it ahead of time, whether they refer to it right away, it's okay either way, but at least they've identified who these people are for the future, for future times.
Yes.
And so the first few weeks are like foundational things like that, like the coping skills, support systems, definitions, language. And then as we get into the later weeks of the workshop, that's when it starts to focus more on like music, song lyrics, using media as well. What TV shows or characters do we see that have experienced certain ACEs or mental health challenges? And because for some people, it can be, we talked about not feeling alone, and sometimes people can relate to a character more than they can relate to someone in real life. And that's okay. It's still someone or something to look at that you can sort of see yourself in, or see how that character handled something or is handling something, because there's a lot of movies and TV shows and songs that do a really good job of talking about or depicting these challenges. So I think that it's been a really effective way to get young people to think about that stuff, because it's things that they're already watching or listening to anyway. So it's kind of like, take these things that you're already watching and just pay a little bit closer attention to what you might be seeing in there, like based on everything we've spoken about up to this point. So those are really the main topics, and there's several activities that are focused on those main pieces within this workshop.
Well, and checking out your website, it also looks like the kids are able to share their story. They're able to do some internships, which I love. I've sent your information out to several of my teacher friends in upstate New York, and I'm really hoping to get more eyes on this, because it is so important. So yeah, tell us a little bit about what they can do.
Yeah, of course. So that's the workshop piece. And then in terms of storytelling, we, over the last few months a few months ago, we launched a storytelling platform. So we call it Every Voice Heard, because that's really what we're all about. Everyone's voice should be heard. Everyone has a story. Telling your story can be really therapeutic, especially if you're telling it in a way that is helpful to others. And also reading and engaging in stories can be, like I just mentioned, that relatability piece. It can help someone else see themselves in your story and say, wow, that sounds a lot like what I've gone through. So storytelling has just proven to be like a tremendous way to connect people together, make people feel not alone. So we created a storytelling platform, Every Voice Heard, where we collect volunteer stories or contributions from individuals, and we share them on the website. So it's both a place for it's both a platform for those who have stories, which is everyone has a story, but those who have stories and want to share them in a way that can be helpful, it gives them a place to do that. And it also is somewhere that young people, or really anyone, can go to, like, as a resource. And so there is a place on our website where there's a form for anyone who wants to or is interested in submitting a story, and really have the option of doing it in any way they want. Most of the ones we currently have are written stories, but video, artwork, poem, really any way you feel comfortable telling your story is welcome and encouraged, because everyone feels comfortable, obviously, with different things. Not everyone wants to write. I personally don't want to draw, but some people might want to draw or create a video. So really any way that you want to share them, that is an option. And that is one of our feature things now too. Another piece that we launched this year that I'm really, really excited about and has been going well so far is we launched a youth advisory board. So we recruited students who wanted to be involved, and they are interested in learning more about ACEs and mental health, and really being leaders within their school and bringing this message to their schools. And we help guide them in ways to do that, so that we can help spread our message, and we can reach more kids that way and teach them about ACEs, impacts on mental health, and other topics as well. They're also part of our really part of our team, and they act as advisors to us to help make sure that the resources that we're putting out there are what they want to be seeing. So to me, it's so important to have the voices of the people that we're doing this work for in the work that we're doing. I always say, like, you can study adolescent development, adolescent mental health, and ACEs. You can study it as much as you want, but as much as I study it, I still don't always know, like, will teenagers actually find this interesting? Will they engage with this? Is this boring? Is it what they want to be seeing? Would they rather watch a video? Would they rather read something? Would they rather write something? So many different options. So we thought, why not ask them? Why not get a group to tell us, give us feedback on what we currently have, and also give us ideas for what they would want to see in the future and what they think that people their age would engage with or latch on to the most, because that's the most important. Kids now have adults like speaking at them constantly. So that is like the absolute last thing that we want to do, and really try to avoid that. Like, our is all interactive group activities. But still, it's still so important to say, hey, do you think this is boring? Like, tell me, is this boring? And like, what would you rather see? Because we want to know, because I don't want to just be putting things out there that aren't helpful. So
that's excellent. I love it all. I definitely, I had a good time going through your website because there's so much information on there. And I definitely know of people that will be interested in this. I just think it's so important what you're doing. I love it. I'm so glad that you're able to come on today and chat.
Yes, thank you so much.
Is there any other information that you'd like to talk about, with the program? Definitely tell us how people can find you and learn more.
Yeah, of course. One more thing I can add, you mentioned our website. So something that is available on our website, and it's recently completed, which I'm thrilled about because it's been a work in progress for a few months now, but we came up with a resource on our website. It's called Know the Signs. So it's under like the What Are ACEs tab under Know the Signs. And what it is, it's a comprehensive resource that lists out a number of different mental health challenges as well as several ACEs. And it's an extended list of ACEs, kind of what I referred to earlier. So they think there's 15 on there, even though the original study only has 10. And if you click into each of the mental illnesses and ACEs, it comes up with a whole like resource page, and each page dives into the definition, like what is it, what are signs and symptoms, what are facts and statistics about this particular thing. And then there are sections on the bottom that it's called, one of them is called like in popular culture. So it breaks down different TV shows, movies, podcasts, books, songs that you can find those different mental health challenges or ACEs in case you want to watch an episode of something or see what that's all about or what it looks like in pop culture. And then there's a resources section at the bottom that's like more formal resources that link to either other organizations that focus on those specific challenges, where we're like kind of broad and focusing on the overarching like ACEs topic. So we link other organizations or other websites that focus specifically on each individual challenge. So there are, like I mentioned, there's, I believe, 15 ACEs on there that each have a page, and there are 10 mental health challenges. I just pulled it up really quick, so I had those numbers. Yeah, so there are resource pages for 15 different ACEs and 10 mental health challenges on there that each have their own. You'll notice all the pages look pretty similar, but they're specific to each of those. And so that could be a really good place for people to look if they just want quick resources to view online too.
Awesome. What do you continue to do to further your healing? Do you feel like starting this project has been very healing for you?
I do, yeah. So before I started this, I had gone into the finance world because after high school, I wanted absolutely nothing to do with any of this. So I went into the finance world, and also financial stability was something that I did not always have growing up. So in my head, I was like, again, something I can control. I was like, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to get a good job that's going to be stable, and it's never going to have to worry about money. Like, that was my mindset. And I did it. I did exactly that. And then I realized this work that I'm doing is so not motivating to me. I guess this isn't exactly what I was looking for. And so that's when I started doing some soul searching, thinking about like, what am I passionate about? Like, what do I want to do? What impact do I want to make? Like, I don't want to just be like another cog at a large company. Like, what is the impact that I do want to make? And that's when I started reflecting like on my own life. And so when I first started this, I was thinking specifically about helping adolescents who had parents or family members who struggle with mental illness or addiction, because that was my specific, that was what I specifically dealt with. And I realized that there wasn't a ton of things that were doing that. So that's what really was my motivation for starting this project. So it has been helpful to my healing journey. That's a long-winded answer to get to, yes,
No,
it has
okay.
been helpful to my healing journey. I think mostly because since I've started doing this work, I have to talk about my story. And I know I don't have to, but it is the reason why I'm doing this. So for someone, to someone that I go to on the outside and they're like, you have a bachelor's degree in economics and you worked in finance, like what on earth are you doing in like the youth mental health space? And so then I of course explained that it's based on my personal experiences. But the other thing is it's been really helpful to have it linked to my story, because I think it adds another layer of meaning to it, because it's something that I really created that I wish that I had when I was younger. And so as someone who has been there, it's just something that I've really put like my own personal experiences into. And I think for me, it's been a really positive way to do that. And the feedback's been really positive every time I do share my story. So I have been a lot more open about my story, even in the last few years, because I did go to graduate school starting in 2018. It was only 1 year, so 2018 to 2019. And while I was there, this was my focus. And I think it was the first time in my life that this had now become like my also like professional focus, even though it had been my personal life. And it felt really good to be able to use these experiences in a positive way and talk openly about my story. And it kept getting easier and easier to do. And now it's really not a big deal for me. I'm totally open about talking about it, but I had never been before because I didn't think that anybody would understand. And it also wasn't until I got to grad school that I even heard the term adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. So that's when this became even broader, when I realized this work that I want to do for adolescents who have parents or family members who are struggling with mental illness or addiction. It's really broader, because that falls into this ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, category. It just wasn't a term that I even knew before. So I thought, even more so, if I knew that term when I was in high school, things might have been different, because I would have been able to say, hey, that's me. Like, that's what I am going through. And if I had a program like what I've created, and I am obviously constantly creating, I might have been able to say, hey, that's me. And also that's okay. Like, that's okay that that's me, because here are all these things that I can do about it, and to avoid some of these long-term impacts, and that I'm not the only one going through it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I love seeing women turn their past into something that is, it's powerful. It is powerful to come from that situation and make that choice, to turn it around and use it for the betterment of other people, to be who you needed when you were younger. It's so inspiring to me. And, that's what I'm hoping to do with intentional holistic healing as well, is just help women realize that there are so many other tools out there, because even though I think of myself as very healthy now, and I was pretty healthy throughout the years, I did a lot of numbing. I did a lot of numbing through alcohol. I did numbing through pills, and I was still the high achiever. I was doing all the stuff. So nobody ever really, I was a little bit of a hot mess here and there. But I definitely wish that I'd had access to all of this stuff. Served up on a little platter, years ago, because I did feel very alone. I did feel very, very ashamed. I was so ashamed. I was so embarrassed about the things that had happened to me. And I didn't talk to anybody for years. I didn't think, both about my childhood and about the abuse and sexual trauma within my personal relationship. I just didn't think anybody would understand. So there was a lot of shame around it. And I think that when you create organizations like yours, businesses like mine, just spaces for people to talk openly about the things that they've been through, I mean, it is just insane, like what you can accomplish with that.
Totally.
I told, a little bit of my story for the first time this year in January, and it was to a room full of high school students, 9th, 10th, 11th graders. And I was shaking. I mean, I was so scared, but there was something so healing about it. And these kids came up to me afterward, the stuff that they told me and the stuff that they revealed to me about what they were dealing with at home was heartbreaking, but also, for me to be able to be there and tell them, like, you can get through this, was such a powerful, part of healing in my story. So I love what you're doing.
Thank you. I was going to say quickly, I can relate to that. I told my story to a group of high school students for the first time last fall. And I found myself, we sat in like a circle in the classroom, and I found myself crying in this circle with these high school students. And that is, if you would have asked me even like an hour before I started, if that's where I thought that would have ended up, the answer would have been like, absolutely not. Because I didn't realize how much, I think it was seeing their reaction that made it really emotional for me. It also was the fact that I was able to be there for them in a way that I didn't have that person there for me, or didn't have that education there for me, I should say. And I was there to give that to them. And this kind of like, it came full circle in that moment. And then their reaction was so positive that it just became this emotional thing. But it was really, really important, I think, for me as well, to be able to see that reaction and what I was doing for them and how I had gotten there too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very full circle when you see when you see your story, like the impact of your story on other people. And I think it's also validating. It's like, oh shit, the stuff that I went through, it's pretty bad. I came out of it, and now, I'm doing this.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So Samantha, 16 Strong Project, I'm going to put all your info once I upload this. I'm going to hit the stop recording, and I'll chat with you for a second after.